Welcome to the Orange Tea, where we explore what it means to be T-shaped professionals, broad in perspective, deep in expertise, and abreast of innovation. Hosted by Stephen M. Perry, founder and CEO of Kymanox, we unpack ideas that shape the future, build exceptional teams, and create lasting impact. From thought leadership on performance and wellness to insights into modern healthcare, this is your space to think holistically and grow intentionally, just like the people who make Kymanox a leader in the life science industry.
Welcome to the Orange Tea, and today we have our guest, Roger Lias. Roger, you have a term that I heard you throw around in the office, and you said you got yesed to death. Could you explain that to the audience?
Yeah, this was during my time managing folks in India, primarily. Well, entirely. I've had a couple of stints working with Indian companies, and we were talking about cultural differences in leadership styles. And one of the observations I had, which was an interesting one, that I would sit with my Indian management team, senior people, not junior people by any means. We'd have our weekly meetings, all right, what have we got to do this week? Western style, let's do it. Yes, we're going to get that done. Yes, we understand that. Yes, that'll be done. Yes, that'll be done. 7 days later, next Monday, nothing has been done at all. And that's what I call being yesed to death. And a lot of it is to do, I think, with the hierarchical style or management situation over there. It's very interesting. Somewhat similar in South Korea, actually, but for completely different reasons.
So what's happening behind the scenes? So they're telling you yes, right, to your face, and you're a top leader, right?
Yep.
And then what's happening behind the scenes, do you think?
What it is, this was not happening at multinationals or anything. They operate much the same way as they would over here. But these, you have this promoter model in India where the promoters, the key investors, stay involved.
Okay.
And all decisions go up to them all the time. They're not pushing down responsibility and ownership, and people don't take that responsibility anything like as easily and as readily as they do over here. And that's, it's
so it has to kind of trickle back up to the promoter.
Not trickle it all, unless in this particular case, unless the promoter said or was in the room or I got the minutes signed off by him, nothing ever happened. And it was okay. It was very interesting. Now you can work around it once you figure out what's happening and how the culture works over there. It's it's just different. There's ways to work around it, and of course, working with the promoter to help get things done is the obvious way around it. But it was really a big eye opener for me. It took me a couple of weeks to realize. I'm like, what is going on here? Nothing is happening.
Yeah, and it's different than
I had a C-suite title. It's not like I was the some strange weirdo from the U.S. coming in.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so let's back up a little bit, Roger. Let's talk a little bit about your background. So I think you and I share a commonality. We're dual citizens. So I've worked in Germany. My family and I are EU citizens. I'm detecting like an accent I'm hearing from you. Sounds a little bit like Outer Banks, North Carolina, maybe. Yeah. So could you tell the audience a little bit about your background, where you're from, include where you can some of your multicultural experience?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in North Carolina. I've been in the States 37 or so years. Grew up in the UK. I was lucky enough to do a PhD in Cambridge and biochemist. So it now stands for previously had depth. I moved over to the dark side, the commercial side of our business fairly early. Came across to the States about 37 years ago, 10 years or so in the Boston area, about 20 or so years here in North Carolina in this area where we raised our kids. And then more recently, I'm now in Southern California. But during those stints, being with multinational companies, a lot of European companies, and then in the latter part of my career, I've spent a lot of time in APAC, in particular India, South Korea, a little bit of time in Taiwan, some in Japan. So it's been really interesting sort of seeing how things are managed differently around the world. We all get there in the end. I'm not saying different systems and different cultures are wrong in any way, but they are different. And we need to understand that as we work in a global marketplace, and developing the products that we develop, biopharmaceuticals in this case, is complex, and it's a global business. It takes a village.
So it sounds like you're a true global executive. You, like I said, born and raised in the UK. You've got both East Coast and West Coast experience in the United States. And I think we were talking previously that those are different cultures, even just within the United States.
Absolutely.
Could you talk a little bit about this difference between North Carolina, where you spent quite a few years, and that's actually where you and I met. So we've known each other now for about 25 years. Just as like full disclosure, I used to sneak in Roger's office. So he was one of the top executives, which is now Fujifilm Diosynth Biotechnologies. And I would kind of sneak into his office and see what publications he had on his table. And so there were all these industry publications. And so I was kind of sneaking around in his office. And one of the things I knew about Roger, he was the most well-read executive I'd ever worked with up until that point. So that's just like a little fun fact. So can you talk about the difference between North Carolina and California?
Yeah, well, first of all, Stephen was my first stalker, obviously, so that's an interesting piece of information. Actually, I'll actually flip the question a little bit. The bigger cultural change was when I moved from the Boston area down to North Carolina. Now, this is a few years ago yet, but that was quite a shock. Obviously, the South is known for the politeness and everything, but it was much more real than I'd anticipated. And it comes down to things, swearing in the office. Nobody worried about it at all in Boston. I came down here and it was like, oh my goodness, let's tamp that down a little bit. And these things make a difference. It takes a while. My cynical English sense of humor just didn't fly in When I moved from the UK to the US, I had to drop 80% of it. When I moved from Boston to North Carolina, I had to drop most of the rest of it because I would just inadvertently offend people. And we don't think enough about these things in our everyday lives or in our business lives. The world is changing, right? It is global now, and we're understanding these things more. But it's been a really interesting journey.
I think I moved from Chicago to North Carolina, and what I realized is I couldn't move as fast as I was used to moving in Chicago. In Chicago, if you don't move fast enough, you get shot in the office, right? And it all goes all the way down to the grocery store. In North Carolina, I remember my first experience buying groceries. The person was like grabbing the item, looking at it, commenting on it, scanning it, and then moving it along. In Chicago, they just whip it by the scanner as quickly as possible. And if you don't have your payment ready in advance, you get quite a few nasty looks from the other patrons. And then North Carolina, everyone's kind of taking their sweet time, but it doesn't necessarily hamper the productivity. So I had to kind of start to embrace the culture in order to really get the maximum performance out of my style. Let's go back to that California question. So if you're doing business in, say, LA, San Diego, San Francisco versus, here on the East Coast, are there any cultural sensitivities, even things like, do you dress differently? Do you order something different at the restaurant?
Yeah, no, the dressing one is interesting. I think that's changed a little bit now. When I was here on the East Coast, I used to spend a lot of time on the West Coast. It was always my nightmare because you have 4 or 6 meetings in a day. Long time since I've worn a tie, but some of these meetings would be jacket and tie respectable. The next guys are in flip flops and shorts, and it's real. It's very real. We're in biotech, right? So what do? You dress for the highest common denominator, of course, and just loosen your shirt a little bit more. I think communication styles, it's very casual on the West Coast. It is more casual than on the East Coast, and we don't think about those differences.
I'll add to that. So I'm in San Diego quite a bit, and I noticed the casual interaction. And what happens is you may not understand the gravitas of the situation. So while the conversation is casual, the business is just as intense.
The meaning is still there.
The meaning's still there. And so that took an adjustment period for me. My hack, by the way, is you mentioned the button. So what I do is I just drop a button when I head to LA.
Yeah.
Same for Miami. Maybe Miami, I may drop 2 buttons.
Yeah. But it goes back to to some extent, back to the Indian experience, right? If you go in with a California attitude and you just say something casually, people don't take it that way, so they don't do anything about it. They don't think it's real and important. You've got to pretty much bang on the table and sometimes even yell to get things done. But they don't look at that as a bad thing. That they're used to it. It's a cultural difference. There's nothing right or wrong with it. If I get yelled at in the office here, I'm like, oh my goodness, it's the end of the world. They don't care. They get yelled at all day long.
Yeah.
And I say that with great respect. It's just a different way of doing things. It's the way you go to work every day and what you expect.
My college roommate was from New York, Long Island specifically. And when I came back from my first stint at college to spend time at home again, I had picked up a new word, and it was the New York but it starts with the letter F. And so I just started throwing that around, and that was, you thought Chicago could handle it, and it was not well received.
Yeah.
Anytime I'm up in New York, sometimes I come back with, that back in my vocabulary, and I have to kind of eliminate it from the vocabulary when I get back here to North Carolina.
Yeah. Another interesting one, we talk about Europe as well. And you mentioned that we first worked together at Diasynth, basically, in the early days. They've dropped the Diasynth from the Fujifilm name now, so it's Fujifilm Biotechnologies. That
Diasynth logo just got smaller and smaller, and now you're telling me it's just gone, correct?
It's gone.
Okay.
It's completely gone. But I remember we were acquired by Diasynth, part of AkzoNobel, big European Dutch organization. And by pure chance, I was on a flight to the Netherlands, and I was next to a guy from Royal Dutch Shell, and we were just talking about life and business. And we started talking about business styles. And I was a little frustrated because we were trying to do some licensing deals, and it was taking forever to get sort of approvals and go ahead. And I was losing the deals. Other people stepped in and did them. And the gentleman from Royal Dutch Shell, Dutch gentleman, said, well, that's the difference. In the US, if you're going from A to B in a business journey, you start the journey and you have momentum. And if you take the odd wrong turn, you correct it and you're fine. Whereas if you're in the Netherlands, you have to know exactly which turns you're taking and when you're taking them, then how you're going to get from A to B. And very often by the time you then start the journey, it's obsolete. You don't need to make the journey anymore. It's, these ways, cultural ways of doing things. So the whole thing fascinates me greatly. I mean, South Korea is another really fascinating place. The culture I love South Korea, but the culture is very different, the business culture.
Yeah, and I'm a big student of the difference between East versus West. So if you study ancient Indian philosophy, which goes back 6,000 years, there's also ancient Chinese philosophy. There's some really interesting things. And what you notice is markedly different from the West. And if you come into the Kymanox headquarters here and go into our boardroom, Roger, you'll notice this massive Chinese wind gong. It's the biggest one that we could buy. I caught quite a bit of flack upgrading that on our 20th anniversary. But it's a stark reminder that the East is different from the West. And the East has some things that the West doesn't have. And one of them is the East has this long-term outlook. So if you go into the Japanese boardroom in Japan, you'll notice, the age of the participants really matters. So age equals wisdom, wisdom equals respect, and everyone kind of follows into that hierarchy. And what you'll notice is in that Japanese boardroom, they build decisions, usually by consensus, usually with detailed plans, but based on 100-year outcomes. And here in the United States, it's like, what am I going to do in the next 100 days?
100 minutes.
And I think some of that's dictated by publicly traded companies that have to kind of report their earnings every quarter. And so it's like, what did you do for me this quarter? What are you going to do for me next quarter? And the Chinese take it up a whole level. Chinese, if you look back at their whole cultural history, they make decisions based on the impact to the 7th generation. That's about 250 years. So it's not a quarter or like 3 months. It's a quarter of a millennia. And so that idea of this long-term outlook, and I think also a long memory, brings very stark contrast. So I think part of the value equation at Kymanox is, hey, we want to be a little bit different. We want to embrace these Eastern ideas. And one of them is, let's create lasting long-term value. And the way we're going to do that is think long-term and make decisions based on long-term impact.
I think there's some really good examples directly in our industry. And again, I'll go back to South Korea. You have capital investment. It takes a long time to build and validate and use infrastructure, large-scale infrastructure for manufacturing biologics and advanced therapies as well. So it's very interesting. If you look at South Korea, you have companies like Samsung and Lotte and Prestige Biologics and things. They are prepared to invest vast sums of money in extremely large-scale infrastructure with no expectation of a return for years to come. But it's for society, right? Now, I question them a lot about it. I know some facilities that are sitting quite idle there right now. And it's not ideal, but they're not fretting too much about it. We'd be losing our minds over it.
Yeah.
And I would say, interestingly, in India, it's even more different. It's much more, I need a return, in 10 minutes. So they're very careful with allocating. They'll still do the spend, but it takes a long time to get it done. And all of these things factor into your everyday business life as well, and probably even your personal life. It's a different mindset.
It's great when you're visiting around the world and how the level of patience for the big returns that may not even be on a 10-year horizon, maybe beyond a 10-year horizon. And I think if you just talk to most American business people, if you try to have a discussion beyond 10 years, people look at you cross-eyed and they call you a futurist and some other bad words. And it's just hard to have a discussion. It's hard to hold anybody's attention. Could you talk about leadership style? So you've been a leader at a lot of these different multicultural, multinational companies, or companies that are just based in these countries around the world. How have you adapted your leadership style? What leadership styles have you seen? What works in this global economy that we have?
Yeah, I think I fairly quickly, I've got a fairly open collegiate management style, right? We develop these incredibly complex products. You need a lot of people involved. We all need to be on the same page. We need to agree with one another broadly to get things done, is my opinion. I learned fairly quickly, especially in Asia. Europe's a bit different again, but we'll use Asia as the example. You're not going to change people's culture. I mean, it's very difficult to change a business culture, let alone, obviously, one Brit American in India is not going to change 7,000 years of history. So you have to work within the system. You have to adapt. I think you have to be very open-minded. And part of it is working out why things aren't progressing or why you're not getting the traction you need or whatever it is. And very often it is down to these hierarchical structures. So in Korea, for instance, I found it actually, once you've sort of figured that out, there's things that come into play, language barrier and things, right? In India, everybody speaks English pretty much, or certainly in your work life. In Korea, that's not the case. Of senior management, very good English, but you can't communicate with people further down directly anyway. So in Korea, I found, as you said, it's the same as Japan. It's a culture based on respect and, longevity to a certain extent. So working through the existing management, Korean management in Korea, if I need to get something done, I can generally get it done. But there's no point in me yelling and screaming and asking for it. I have to talk to someone else to get someone else to yell and scream and ask for it. And it works. India, I say, is a little different. And again, I got to be a little careful because there's a big difference between an Indian multinational, which, they're multinationals. They operate not exactly the same way, but somewhat, parallel with the way a multinational would operate anywhere. But these smaller companies, my opinion really, or my learning is you can't affect change, not that easily. You have to go to the top man to get anything done. And it's this people, it's more of a, and I'm very cautious about saying this because the work outputs are fantastic. The people are great. The science is great. The people work hard, but it's more of I equate it to be perhaps being in the UK in the 1950s. It's go to work 9 to 5, and that's not literally true, but go to work, do your hours. You have a tea break at 3:00. People aren't as vested in the outcome of the business. And therefore, they don't take on as much responsibility or take it on as easily and as readily. They have to be told what to do. Once they're told what to do, fantastic. I mean, really amazing science and outcomes and everything else. And it's not that the people aren't capable of, thinking and doing these things. It's just not the way things are done. You wait to be told to do something by your manager or your manager's manager, or ultimately in some of these sort of smaller private companies, it's the boss man, the guy who invested the money. And it doesn't matter who you are, and it doesn't matter if you're an English guy who's run a publicly traded company in the US. You're not going to change that, not easily. You have to work through it and around it.
So
learn from it.
Yeah, and you use the word like adapt. Like you need to adapt to the culture. Obviously, respect it, learn it. What are some of the things that you did to adapt? Did you learn a couple phrases in the local language? Did you dress a little bit differently? Did you order from their traditional menu versus looking for the chicken tenders? Roger, could you just talk about some of that adaptation that you've done at a very practical level?
Yeah, I'm not a chicken tenders guy, so I love Indian and Korean food and everything else. But that it counts, right?
Yeah, and I was just saying like a stereotypical American diet, right?
What do you do? You go out and get to know the people. So you embrace the culture, and I'm not talking about work culture now. I'm talking about get out, go to the restaurants, go to the sporting fixtures, the cricket matches, get to know the people a bit. And they appreciate it. They absolutely appreciate it. So I think that does go a long way. More immediately at work, I think one of the things that I found worked very well because people weren't used to it, but people all over the world have the same drivers, right? I used to share a lot more information than, within reason, obviously, there's stuff you can't share. But I was happy enough to go in and talk a little bit about how we're doing and, what our problems are and, the good stuff, the bad stuff. And I think in these hierarchical structures, a lot of people further down the organization just never hear that stuff. So I found that if I was prepared to open up a little bit about what's going on, again, within reason, people responded amazingly. A guy in Hyderabad or, Osan, South Korea, or wherever it is no different than a guy in San Francisco or Boston. They feel empowered when they have information and they so these people are capable, without doubt, more than capable of taking on some of this stuff. It's just that the system doesn't quite allow them to. So I did find that sharing information, again, within reason, helps. Now that helped, over here as well. I was CEO of a publicly traded company. It used to frustrate the living heck out of me that we were blacked out so much of the time that couldn't share information. And, in this case, we're talking about financial information. I want my guys to understand the good and the bad, right? Because it helps then, if we got to make some difficult decisions, well, what's the reason, right? The market is this or the financials are this, and we have to run a business. We have to remain solvent and, keep growing and everything else. But when you can't share that, perhaps, or a culture does not share that, or in a publicly traded company you can't share that, I think it becomes a lot more difficult to motivate people and keep them moving.
Yeah, I think you get, so at Kymanox, one of the promises that we have for our employees is that we're not going to put people in a box, right? So yeah, we have swim lanes, but you can kind of go underneath the little swim lane barrier, right? And I think in order to get people to work for the greater good of, these are modern medicine development programs, and you're trying to commercialize the medicine, you're trying to get the product to the patient. The only way to empower them is with knowledge. And then what I tend to do is I probably overshare to the extent where it's like, okay, maybe that's going to create fear because they had this additional information. So is that ever backfired on you culturally, or do you create another set of problems? Like for my experiences, I've unintentionally created fear because I've shared kind of the nitty gritty of a particular program or how the company's doing. And it kind of backfires. And I still err on the side of sharing additional information because I think ultimately people want to be autonomous and they want to perform and they want to be part of something amazing. And the only way to be a part of something amazing is to have success, and success in our business means getting these products over the finish line.
Yeah, I don't think it's really, there might be occasions where it's backfired. I think a lot of it comes down to being somewhat sensible about what you're sharing, right? You can't, not all the dirty underwear needs to be on display.
Yep.
So I don't think so. I think the positives just vastly outweigh the negatives, or potential negatives. And again, it's I'd rather people ask forgiveness than permission in a lot of ways. We've got to keep moving forward. We've got to have momentum. We've got to go there. And I think the vast majority of people, doesn't matter if you're the forklift truck driver or the, executive VP of something. It doesn't matter if you're India or in China or in North Carolina or California. People respond to that. I firmly believe that. That's a human nature. Now, not all people, because they're not used to it, are capable of quickly embracing it and
processing
using that knowledge and wisely. I think that's perhaps a bit of more of a learned experience, and I think you learn it much more quickly over here in the States and probably in Europe than you do in parts of Asia. I think it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and I think sharing that information about whatever you're sharing, right? I think it helps build trust. I think the next topic, Roger, is let's talk about trust. Let's talk about accountability and how that plays out around the globe. Any observations on those subjects of trust and accountability?
I think you've got to walk the walk, right? I mean, people see through you pretty quickly if you're not, if you're pulling the wool over their eyes or you're not being trustworthy yourself. I think there's more blind trust in these hierarchical structures because what other choice do you have, really? I mean, it's like, okay, but we've got to assume our management or executives or whoever it is know what they're doing and will follow, because that is the model.
Can I share one of my experiences?
Of course.
And so I worked in Stuttgart, Germany for a year. I'm a citizen of the country Luxembourg with my family, and I don't know. I'm from Chicago and I live in North Carolina. I kind of have that Midwest upbringing, pretty warm, and I think I've embraced, just growing up in the United States, I've embraced you can be my friend, best friend in about 5 minutes, and I can embrace you. And then we can just be the best friends ever, either in the personal life or in the work life. And then if there's a betrayal or there's a problem, then, we divorce, we break that relationship, or we set boundaries. And what I noticed when I went over to Europe and tried to become a best friend from someone right out of the gate,
Not going to happen.
it was a massive cold shoulder. And what I realized was it takes years to develop a friendship. And then once that friendship is solidified, nothing breaks the bond. So could you talk a little bit about that, specifically between the US and Europe, on how we're embracing people, either, preferably in the workplace, but even in the social settings?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on. Obviously, I grew up in the UK. I do a lot of work even now in Europe, and with shout out to my friends, the Swedes and the Nordics, I'm doing a lot of work with at the moment. They're the ultimate in ice princess, if you like, or whatever it is. But once you break through, you're there forever. Yeah. So I think it's an interesting observation. I mean, it's Europeans stereotypical of view of the U.S. citizenship is, have a nice day and how are you? No one is ever going to tell you, oh God, it's terrible, I'm miserable. It's everything's fine, right? It's that more culture, right? It's that cultural stuff. So I think the other.
So does the U.S. then move business faster because people are just embracing each other as business partners and just moving like going from 0 to 100, versus Europe, things are much more measured? Like, does that slow down the business process, and how do you work around that?
I think,
or is it just like part of the?
Probably does, although of course a lot of other things come into play, capital deployment and everything else. I think of it in terms of momentum. The US maintains momentum, right? Maybe it's by backslapping and going to the bar together. There's lots of other things in play as well. But I've been here a long time now, so sometimes it's when I think of European business practice, sometimes I'm thinking of 30 years ago, and things have changed over there as well. But to me, it's about America has that can-do attitude, right? Still does, always has through its foundation. And that culture, I think, definitely is an advantage when developing a biologic, for instance. Let's get it done. It's a can-do attitude rather than, that's going to be a problem and that's going to be a problem.
Yeah. And what I notice is there's a cockiness and even confidence and cockiness in the United States where, okay, I've never done this before, but I'm smart. I can figure it out. I've got Google. I can Google it. I can just do this. And in Europe, these are very accomplished professionals. These people are actually academically more credentialed than their U.S. counterparts. They actually have more on their CV in terms of experience, and they're very measured about what is possible and what is the likelihood of success. And I feel like, honestly, that can slow Europe down a little bit, but it's also very reassuring. That's why I'm only driving exclusively German automobiles right now, Roger. It's very reassuring because when they do say yes and when they do jump in, they have all the boxes checked.
Yeah, we need to be aware though, but within the U.S., culture works and everything else. People see the U.S. as being pretty obnoxious sometimes, and we shouldn't do that. We've got to make sure if we need to be working together, we don't want to upset our European counterparts, which we do fairly regularly, probably particularly now in the current political situation. It's really quite depressing to talk to European colleagues right now about the US. And we're creating this is big picture now, of course, we're creating a pretty bad situation in my opinion. But even just in more general, that I think the US is, still quite insular, right? I mean, I don't know what the percentages are now, but the percentage of Europeans that have a passport versus the percentage of the US that has a passport, there's a radical difference. So, we tend to look quite inward in the US. And I'm biased, right? I'm a European by birth, but I think it's quite sad. We don't really embrace the rest of the world very much.
And we're not I think we lack as the country as a whole. I mean, these are just all generalizations, right? I think we lack the educating ourselves about all these other cultures and the long histories. I mean, the United States has a relatively short history. There are buildings that you can walk to in Europe and even, my goodness, in Asia. And this is multiples of how long the United States has existed in terms of just a discovered country.
Yep.
From that time. So I'm very sensitive to not being the obnoxious American, loud, blowhard American, either on vacation or in the business meetings. But I do like to bring that risk taking and that energy level and let that bleed over a little bit for our European colleagues.
Yeah, there's plenty of ways to skin a cat, right? We should embrace and find the best from everything, but no one culture can say our way is best. It just isn't. And we need to understand that and look for opportunities to embrace, as you said earlier, maybe Eastern culture and forward thinking comes into it. There's so many. It's a big world out there.
And what I noticed, Roger, I think one of the reasons the U.S. kind of gets away with this bad behavior is like we're not studying all the cultural differences, we're not learning about the histories of all these countries, is because when you look at global healthcare spending, U.S. is so dominant in the spending. Right. Yeah. So no matter who you are, you're an engineer, a scientist, just a business person with a new idea that is going to be a new modern medicine or a new modern treatment for patients in need, your market is going to be in the U.S. And so I think there's this false belief that everything's happening in the United States, when in reality, when we start to unpack the supply chain, there's a lot of things that are happening for those U.S. companies, those U.S.-based products, those things that were born and made here in the United States, and there's a heavy reliance on the global supply chain. So could you talk a little bit about that global supply chain and the importance it has?
Oh, in our business, it's massive. As it happens, a little over a year ago, I was pulled into a E5 forum, which at the time was confidential. Now it's known about. At the Bio International Convention, talking exactly about supply chain. And we were talking about, at that point, it's batteries and rare earth minerals and it's real supply chain. We are dependent on the rest of the world, including China and,
Yep.
And I think we are going to we're going to run ourselves into a lot of problems if we keep down the current path without getting into sort of naked politics or anything. Exceptionalism works to a point. But we're in a global world. We are now. Can you theoretically, reshore, onshore all your supply chain? Yeah, but it's going to take years and years and years. And in some cases, we simply don't have the materials, right? The raw materials. So we still need to go to Uzbekistan or wherever it is where we're mining our boron. It's like,
and you're not always dealing with Thermo Fisher or whoever's in your supply chain. You're sometimes dealing with a niche company that's really only located in that country. And so this is where you need to really be sensitive as a business person as a visitor. And that could be the only supplier or maybe the only one of two suppliers in the world that can really provide what you need.
We're not going to be self-sustaining in bananas anytime soon, right? And it's the same principle, right? I mean, some things only come from certain parts of the world.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I think that's where even if you're thinking that all the growth is in the United States, all the capital is being deployed in the United States, a lot of the innovations in the United States, it's like, well, even if that is true, and it's not always true, the supply chain is a global supply
reliant on a global supply chain.
Yeah,
and that's in biopharmaceuticals again, perhaps less so in biopharmaceuticals than some other industrial areas, but it's still. It only takes one or two things to be missing and you're done. I mean, that's the end.
Let's talk about Saudi Arabia. I think that's an interesting country. They obviously have quite a bit of money from their oil-based economy. And I think strategically, they're trying to wean themselves off and diversify their country for, their 100-year, their 1,000-year future. And they're really leaning into, advanced therapies and biologics and drugs as a part of their country and making these large investments at the government level. Could you talk a little bit about what you know there, and how do you think that's going to play out over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think money talks, of course, and it's not just Saudi Arabia. You've got Emirates and Jordan, and a lot of areas, and even
So all those oil-producing countries,
other parts of North Africa as well, though, starting to invest in more domestic pharmaceutical manufacturing. Put simply, it'll happen for sure. That's an interesting one because we talk about resources and materials. In that case, they have the money and the engineering capabilities and things to do these things. It's actually people. So the resource then is actually largely people coming from the US and Europe, and we shouldn't forget that either. So it takes time. They need expertise, but it is happening. It's not a case of it will happening. It's very much happening.
And I think of like the Samsung Biologics story. Did Korea really have biopharmaceutical development and manufacturing in their core DNA, or did they import that for years and had to build it up?
They had manufacturing in their core DNA, but they didn't really have the bio bit, but they've built it incredibly successfully.
I just know a lot of people that were imported to specifically the Samsung Biologics project.
Yeah.
And then now, and they put in multi-year stints.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was a strategic initiative from
Absolutely.
Samsung to import that knowledge.
Yeah, and China no different as well. I mean and one interesting, when I was thinking about this podcast, one of the, back to the culture thing, right? There's and again, I'm not picking on anybody. If we look at India, a lot of expats come to the US or Europe, to Australia, wherever, to be educated and to get experience, and then go back to India. One observation I made is a lot of them very quickly integrate back into their home culture, understandably, in terms of leadership and management style. So you bring the technical, expertise, but that sort of Western leadership does not translate back in again. It immediately reverts back to what works wherever you are.
Let's get to some of the takeaways. So if you were to advise a younger version of yourself who's now had this amazing, stellar, global biopharmaceutical career, what are some of the takeaways you would give yourself just starting out in this business?
All right. I think a big one for me is, if a door opens, take it, walk through it. That's for sure. Okay. We have massive opportunity in our industry here. We have our struggles right now, capital markets and what have you, but the potential of these products, and now especially with cellular therapies and things like that, is just this could change society. So I think it's a great field to be in. But take those opportunities when they arise. They will arise. I think back to what would my life have been like if I hadn't taken that opportunity to come across to the US 37 years ago.
Could we back up and talk about that? So you were a grad student, or?
Yeah, no, I'd finished my PhD. I was working for a company.
Postdoc?
Not postdoc.
Or
I was done with academic.
So you were working in industry?
Yeah, I was working for a company called MediSense, and we were doing biosensor diagnostics, and I was an enzymologist, essentially immobilizing enzymes for diagnostic use. And the story's quite interesting. I was sitting in the lab one day. I was just lab rat, right? PhD scientist, and called Roger. The gentleman's name is Ron Zwanzig. He's the chairman of the company. And I thought someone was pulling my leg. I'm like, right. So I'm like, hello. Yeah, sure enough, it was. And they'd had a board meeting, and he wanted 510Ks filed for these diagnostic products. Roger, do you know what a 510K is? Sort of. Something to do with the FDA. Good enough. Pick someone else out of the lab. I want you to. We were in Oxford area in the UK. Fly to Boston, Massachusetts. There was a consultant there.
So this is opportunity knocking.
Yeah, this is Wednesday. I want you flying Friday, right? So I jumped at it, right? And so it was a 3-week stint. Happened to be over a Christmas period. We had to get. We had to do the label copy and all this stuff. We didn't know what we were doing. We were making it up as we were going along. I think even the consultant, respectfully, who was helping us, didn't know everything he needed to know. But we got it done, and we filed these 3 510Ks. And it was a fun experience, right? We worked our rear ends off and took advantage of it. It was snowy and cold as hell in Boston for 3 weeks. But that 3 weeks resulted in come back for 3 months, and then 3 years on an H-1B visa, and then a green card, and a wife and kids, and life changes.
It's kind of funny that you got your opportunity knocking wasn't some next gen biotech program, but it was a
no.
in vitro diagnostic. Is that what that was? Right?
Yeah, basically. It's like the technology is still fundamentally the same now for a lot of these blood glucose monitors for diabetes. But we had tests for cholesterol and acetaminophen poisoning and all sorts of things. I'll tell you one day about the clinical trials at Cook Hospital in Chicago. That was fun.
Yeah, but now you're at a company in Kymanox where we're actually the world's #1 professional services firm for combination products. So this is, a high value biologic in some type of dose delivery system that's classified as a medical device. And there's a whole other set of regulations called Part 4, if you're in the US, that kind of governs these combination products. And what's funny is you're like, hey, Steve, let me focus on the biologics, but your background is actually on that device side.
Very early background.
Very early background. So
I then got an opportunity to move in. Yeah, we were doing planograms for CVS and Sunday supplements in the Boston Globe and things.
Yeah, but Dr. Nick Letourneau runs our IVD program. I think he's got an opening, Roger. So
if the door opens, you got to walk through it. Maybe that's my next step. So, but yeah, I moved, say, a long time ago into the biologics manufacturing. So I've been basically, of my 37 years here, only the first couple of years were in that side of the
side of the fence. All right, so that's a great word of wisdom. Is when an opportunity knocks, go through the door, run through the door.
Absolutely, knock the damn door down if you have to. Yeah. If there's a hint of an opportunity.
Any other takeaways? Any other wisdom you'd give your younger self?
Oh boy, there's probably a whole lot in personal life and real life, but no, I mean I've been very fortunate. I think again, back to the culture and the travel. Take that travel opportunity, every opportunity you can get. I think it's a great education. I encourage my own kids now in their early 20s, take it, do it, travel, get out there. There's a big world out there.
That's great advice. Yeah.
So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone. I appreciate it.
I haven't got long enough to go over all the stumbles and mistakes I've made. So
yeah, that'll be a whole other.
We'll do a 4-week series for that.
Yeah, and actually I like failure. I mean, everyone I think is scared of failure, and it's like, look, when we're running experiments on behalf of our clients here at Kymanox, and the experiment goes as planned, we learn nothing. We absolutely learn nothing, Roger.
Yeah, embrace the suck.
And so when the experiment fails, we then investigate why, and then we keep asking why, and then eventually we gain a new understanding. And so where all the learning occurs about product and process knowledge, which ultimately benefits the patient, is when we fail.
Absolutely.
So I think people need to embrace failure.
Yep. Dust yourself off.
Yep. Dust yourself off, get up and go. And then I like Roger's advice. I'll end on that. Schedule that trip, get out and see the world.
Don't take things too personally either in your business life. There's always reasons behind it, especially if you're in business development and things. You got to get used to rejection, but don't let the bastards get you down. Excuse my language.
That's great. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Roger. Appreciate it.
Welcome. Thanks, Steve. Take care.
Thank you for joining us on The Orange Tea. Remember, at Kymanox, we believe in small, capable, T-shaped teams driving innovation and progress through broad and deep thinking. Stay connected with us on LinkedIn, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on YouTube or your favorite listening app. For more information about Kymanox, visit Kymanox.com. That's Kymanox.com. Let's continue building and growing together with intention. Until next time on The Orange Tea.